Yeah, why don't we get started? Hello everyone, and welcome to Sensible End-of-Life Planning with presenter Judith Schwarz. My name is Jennifer Quinlan, and I'm the Member Services and Recruitment Coordinator for JP at Home. So before we get started with today's presentation, I'd like to just share just a little bit about JP at Home and go over some of the logistics today. JP at Home is a program with Ethos and a village model for aging in place. JP at Home is a membership organization which was established in 2014 to provide socialization and access to Ethos services to help members age well and in the community. Members design all of the programming, including today's event. Members can attest that JP at Home has been a lifeline during the pandemic. They stay active and engaged in the more than 20 groups and activities they organize each month. There's a member-led writing group, a movie group, a men's group, caregiver support, very popular walk-in groups, and much more. And I'm just one phone call away when members require information or referral. We hold monthly information sessions about JP at Home, and you are most welcome to attend. So please reach out to me via phone or email if you'd like to sign up. So our topic today is a very important one, and Judith will be shedding some light on how we can make our end-of-life wishes known to family and healthcare providers. Judith will be speaking for about 40 minutes, and then we'll open the program up to questions and comments. So you can enter your questions in the Q&A feature of Zoom at any point during the session. And my wonderful colleague, Patrice Catozzi, is here to help us manage the Q&A session. So thanks so much, Patrice.
You're welcome.
Okay, thanks. So please note, Judith will have this lovely PowerPoint presentation, and I will be emailing it to all of you in a day or two after the session. So you'll have all that information at your fingertips. But feel free to take notes, but just know that the presentation will be coming following the event. So at this point, I am very happy to introduce you to our speaker today. Judith Schwarz is a doctorally prepared nurse. For several decades, Judy has responded to the concerns raised by people living with incurable and progressive or terminal illnesses. She is the clinical director of End of Life Choices New York, and this nonprofit agency works to legalize medical aid in dying in New York State and supports the work of other grassroots organizations engaged in similar efforts in their states. So welcome, Judy, and thanks so much for being here today.
Well, the first thing I want to do is say hello, and I'm so sorry we can't meet in person. I hate this, but I know it's better than not having any way to get together. I want to thank you for inviting me, and you all should thank Toddy Gelbspan, who was indeed instrumental in having me do this talk. Toddy and I have known each other for decades. I really hope we can have a discussion because a lot of these issues are complex and people have lots of feelings about them. And I hope that we'll have the opportunity to discuss them. And that's my intention, is to leave lots of time for questions. At the end of this talk, I'm going to give you my contact information so you can call me or email me, whatever you like. So here's the goal for today. Here are the things that we're going to talk about. Very briefly, I'm going to give you an update on the legislation, the medical aid in dying legislation in Massachusetts. Then we're going to talk about what's important to know about advanced directives. And there are some issues that are rather important. I know many of you want to know, until medical aid in dying becomes legal, what options exist right now? So that's what we'll talk about. And I'm interested in sharing with you what we know about dementia, the fears that many people have, and what can be done to limit the dying process in the final stages of dementia. I'm also interested in knowing about your COVID thoughts, your COVID worries, fears, and what your experience has been, if you feel like sharing any of that. And as we have said, lots of time for questions and discussions at the end. So medical aid in dying is not likely to pass this year. Advocates that I know hope that medical aid in dying might pass next year, but as you probably know, there's a lot of resistance to this legislation. Just so you know, to be eligible for medical aid in dying, the person who's making the request of the physician must be both terminally ill and decisionally capable when they make the request. So that's simultaneously. And that determination needs to be made by two separate physicians. And in addition, the patient needs to make two requests with a 15-day waiting period between the two verbal requests. There needs to be a written request. And so you can see that this is not an option for those people who are inclined to be impulsive, nor is it an option that's available for people with dementia, with advanced dementia, because you have to be simultaneously terminally ill and decisionally capable, which is not possible when you have advanced dementia. It's very disappointing news for many people, I can tell you. So why is this not advancing? All right, so what's important about advanced directives and what do you need to know? The most important thing I can tell you is to speak to your appointed healthcare agent. An advanced directive is not one of those one and done things, you know, like I signed it 20 years ago, it's around here somewhere, and so don't worry, I've already done it. No, what you need to do is have an ongoing conversation with your healthcare agent, your appointed healthcare agent, when any of the following 5D events occur. These 5 Ds come from the ABA, the American Bar Association, quite a few years ago, but I find it still relevant. So the question is, when do I need to talk to my healthcare agent about my wishes? When do I need to confirm my wishes? And the advice is whenever any of the 5 Ds occur. So after a decade has passed, after a recent divorce, after a recent decline in your health, after the death of a close family member or friend, or after a new diagnosis. So those are all times that you need to take a pause, call up your healthcare agent and say, we need to talk again. I want to be sure that you understand what my wishes are. All right? So I know that many of you are very concerned about the fact that you feel you don't have any person to appoint as a healthcare agent. I hear this all the time, and I know it's a real issue for many people. I always tell folks to really give a thought to neighbors. It doesn't have to be a best friend. It certainly doesn't have to be a family member. Think of people that you see all the time and that you chat with, and maybe you'll be yours and you be mine, and you work out some kind of a reciprocal relationship. But I concede that it can be a problem because you're really asking quite a lot of somebody to assume this kind of responsibility to implement your choices, not theirs, your choices, right? In the absence of a person that you feel comfortable entrusting with your future healthcare decisions when you're no longer able to speak for yourself, a living will, a written document is certainly better than nothing. And in that written document, you can indicate your personal values about life, prolonging life, quality of life, your wishes, and any kind of personal instructions you have for your own end-of-life care. Even if you have a healthcare agent, to have written down what your important issues and values and wishes are is very helpful for your healthcare agent. They can pull this document out and remind themselves, oh yeah, she said if she ever got into this situation, which I think she's in right now, she would not want X, Y, or Z, or she would want X, Y, or Z. So it's helpful to remind the healthcare agent of the patient's values and wishes. I would also say, though, often it's the case, and in an emergency, papers get lost, or they are unavailable, or you can't find them, or they're unfortunately locked up in the bank, which is never any place to have any kind of a medical directive. It should be very available to you. You should have lots of copies of it. And truly, a person is a much better advocate for your wishes, particularly when the healthcare team is saying, what do you want us to do here? What would she want? What would he tell us that he wanted done if he was able to speak to us? So that's the job of the healthcare agent. And a piece of paper often is not going to deal with the particular issue that is in hand. I know that you folks in Massachusetts also have MOLS. I think they're MOLS, or are they PULSE? One or the other. Medical orders for life-sustaining treatment. This is also something that's very useful, particularly if you don't have a healthcare agent to a point. MOLS are designed for people as the end of life is nearing. So they're not for healthy 40-year-olds or 50-year-olds or even 60-year-olds for that matter. It's for people who have a bunch of chronic ailments. They're not getting better, and one thing leads to another, and they keep going back and forth to the hospital. And after a while, they think, you know what? I don't want to keep doing this. I don't want to go back to the hospital anymore. I do want to have really aggressive pain management, and I want my doctor to know what my wishes are. So the patient or the healthcare agent, if the patient can't speak for themselves, make an appointment with a healthcare provider. It could be a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant. And I guess we do that now by over the internet. You don't have to go in person. And you discuss those wishes. And those wishes become medical orders, and they include your wishes about resuscitation, right? And if you have that MOLS co-signed by your provider and you put it on the outside of your refrigerator so that if there is some kind of medical emergency that requires you to go to the hospital, like a broken bone, for example, the EMTs will see that sign on your refrigerator door that says, "Do not resuscitate," and they will not jump on your chest and break ribs and things like that. But they will take you to the hospital for whatever kind of treatment that you need, right? So healthcare proxy's the best thing. Next best is a written directive, and also a MOLST is highly recommended for people who are clinically appropriate for a MOLST. Okay, so many of you might want to know, until medical aid in dying becomes legal, what's available now? So for decisionally capable persons suffering from a terminal or an incurable and progressive disease who wish to hasten their death, the only patient-controlled legal option to hasten death is voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. I know, that's disappointing news for many of you. VSED is and it's called VSED by me, it's easier to say. VSED is rarely anyone's first choice to control dying. It is sometimes, but rarely. I will tell you also that it's been used by many, many, many folks for generations. It wasn't called VSED then. They just took to their bed and said, "I'm done," right? Turned their face to the wall. Nobody in those days thought it was important for them to keep their strength up and eat chicken soup. They were just part of the family, but they were dying, and everybody recognized that they were. It's harder now. I think it's harder now. I'll also tell you something that I have seen over the years. I've worked with many, many patients and families who've chosen this option to hasten death. Even when the information about VSED has been provided and the patient chooses not to do that, they're comforted by knowing that they can. They're comforted by knowing that they have an option in case things just become intolerable or unbearable. And that's a good thing, even if it's never used. So what is VSED? It's important to know. VSED is a decision to deliberately hasten one's death by stopping all oral intake, food and fluids, while the person is still physically able to eat or drink. It's not as though they have something going on with their throat that they can't swallow. They could, but they chose not to. It's an intentional and voluntary choice by decisionally capable person who suffers intolerably from an incurable, progressive, or terminal illness, and the goal is to hasten death. It's important to note that what you die of is dehydration, not starvation. I'm sure I'll mention that again going down. And it may not matter that much to outsiders, except the notion of starving to death is terrible, right? I mean, most people think that a death by starvation is really awful, and it probably is. But when people choose to stop eating and drinking, the key is limiting or stopping all fluids, and you die of dehydration. So what is a successful VSED outcome, and how is success defined? That's always very important. What are we talking about here? Who's defining success, and how is that defined? So a successful outcome, a successful VSED outcome, is a peaceful death with a minimum of discomfort that occurs within a predictable period of time, either days or weeks. All of those ingredients are important. Relatively pain-free within a predictable period of time. VSED is legally available in all states if the person is decisionally capable and makes a voluntary, by that I mean non-coerced, nobody's making them do this or withholding food or fluid that they would want to eat or drink. It's voluntary. They've decided this is best for them. And it's a contemporaneous choice. They're deciding right now. That's the V part of the voluntary, voluntarily stopping eating and drinking right now. It's important to note that the decision to begin and whether to continue is entirely under the patient's control and entirely up to them. So there are some things that need to be in place in order to achieve a successful VSED death. And again, this is based on several decades of experience that I have with people that choose VSED. So again, I can't say enough. A decisionally capable person who's very determined to hasten death by fasting, who understands the process, knows what to expect, and concludes that for that person, the burdens of living consistently outweigh the benefits of continued life. This is not for people who are having a bad hair day, right? This is for people who are really suffering in ways that they find intolerable. By the same token, they get to define what an intolerable level of suffering is. Nobody else decides that for them. They get to decide that. It's not for everyone. I've known plenty of folks who would just like somebody else to take care of this for them, and you can't. It's up to you. You have to decide. You have to make this happen if you choose. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you have to have support. And by psychosocial support, I mean family or close friends who understand why you made this decision, who accept that you made the decision. They may not be happy about it, but they understand it and they accept it, and they will journey along with you and be present and help you through the process just by being a loving presence. The other thing you'll need to have in place is caregiving support. I tell family members they can't do this because eventually their loved one is going to end up in bed and they can't provide care 24/7. They're going to have some caregiving help. And so they're going to have to pay for aides. And before you hire those aides, you have to be sure the aides understand what the plan of care is and that they accept that. So that's the second thing that must be in place. The third thing is the patient and family must have access to hospice or palliative medical oversight to provide symptom management. It's not complicated, but it's very, very important that there be access to what's necessary to keep that patient comfortable and possibly a little bit sleepy. That's a good idea. Plus, the fourth thing is you have to have patience with the process. Patients and families want to know exactly how long this is going to take, and it's very hard to tell. Depends on their underlying disease load, how robust they are, how able they are to refuse all fluids, and that's the key to this whole process. But still, we have some general information that we can give about what's likely the number of days involved. And that's important information for most families and patients. And I'll tell you that for those with a terminal illness Going without food is usually not a problem. You know, after a couple of days, you get over whatever hunger pangs you had and the hypoglycemic headache and stuff like that, and your body adjusts to that. Foregoing fluids can definitely be challenging, and for some people, it's really challenging. But good oral care, right? Rinsing and spitting cool water, a fine spray at the back of the throat, good oral care, toothbrushing, mouthwash, anything that keeps the mucous membranes feeling moist is the way to go. Small doses of opiates and anti-anxiety medications will facilitate a sleepy state, which I'm a big believer in, because if you're sleepier, you're less likely to be focusing on how thirsty you are. And so the goal here is to minimize suffering. That's the goal here. And to honor the patient's wishes to be able to hasten their death. The usual length of fasting for people with a terminal illness is 7 to 14 days, and the average is 10 days. There's one small study that was done in Oregon quite a few years ago, and it's the only data that we can refer to, but it's certainly consistent with my experience. Sometimes it's sooner, shorter, sometimes it's a little bit longer, but rarely is it beyond 14 days. The key is the fluids, though. I mean, that's the key. Patients often slip into a coma in the last several days before death. There certainly are more challenges when the patient is not terminally ill. And I'll tell you, this is one of the, if you see it this way, one of the benefits of VSED over medical aid in dying. Medical aid in dying, you have to be diagnosed by 2 physicians as being in a terminal state. For people to choose to stop eating and drinking, they don't have to be terminally ill. They just have to have decided that their life is intolerable, that they've lived as long as they can and want to, and that they want an escape. So increasingly, people are becoming more aware of this option and are considering it. But there are challenges with people who are not yet in the terminal stage of an illness. It's very hard to get hospice support. Sometimes a person has to fast for several days before being considered eligible for hospice support. You know, to be enrolled in hospice, somebody has to, a physician or a healthcare clinician has to make a guesstimate that you'll probably die of your disease in 6 months. The other thing that can happen sometimes is long-time physicians will assume the role of palliative oversight by providing or ordering the medications. Small doses of, as I say, opiates, liquid morphine and liquid Ativan are good options, and the family with support from a physician can manage this. It's not rocket science, but you do need to have access to those medications. In the absence of a terminal illness, fasting can last longer, 3, sometimes to 4 weeks. Again, depends on the underlying physical condition of the patient when they begin. It certainly requires a resolute determination to not drink and good family and caregiving support and patience with the process. So let's talk a little bit about dementia now. I can tell you for sure, and you probably would agree with me, that fear of dementia is more prevalent than fear of a cancer diagnosis. People are more worried about losing their minds to dementia than they are about cancer. I mean, nobody wants to get cancer either, but they do a much better job of curing cancer than they do of curing any kind of dementia, because there is no cure, right? And the incidence of Alzheimer's is increasing as Americans live longer lives. It's directly proportional. The older you are, the more likely you are to get dementia. I don't need to tell you that it's an incurable progressive disease that causes increasing debility and dependence, and a period of time between diagnosis and death can be anywhere from 10 to 20 years. I mean, oftentimes, and they're getting much better at diagnosing dementia in the preclinical state, and you can have preclinical dementia, Alzheimer's for 4, 5, 6 years before you even begin to show any signs of it. So it's really quite a long disease. In the early stages, people manage quite well, and I will show you the stages of dementia in another slide. In the final stages, however, that person is unable to communicate, they can't recognize loved ones, they can't manage any of their own activities of daily living, nor can they feed themselves. In the final stages of dementia, they must be hand-fed and may live in that condition for several more years if they're carefully fed. Death is usually caused by aspiration pneumonia. So this is a little, few factoids that you may be aware of. 6 million Americans now have Alzheimer's, and that number is expected to increase to 14 million by 2050. Advanced dementia, including Alzheimer's, is the 6th leading cause of death in US. 10% of folks 65 and older have dementia, have Alzheimer's. And older African Americans are twice as likely to have Alzheimer's disease as older whites, and older Hispanics are 1.5 times as likely to have Alzheimer's disease as Caucasians. So let me show you the stages of declining abilities. Sorry, I'm just going to tell you right now that my dogs are protecting me from barbarians that come over the barricades in the hallways. I'm sorry. So this is called the Functional Assessment Staging Test, or FAST, if you want to look that up. The first stage, stages 1 to 3, it's sort of like beginning, middle, and advanced. So in the beginning stages, you have mild cognitive decline, decreasing organizational ability, and short-term memory begins to decline. But certainly, the person in these stages, 1 to 3, is still decisionally capable. They can still make decisions, they can still complete advanced directives and take care of most of their affairs. By the time you get to stages 4 and 5, that's moderate decline. And by that time, a person definitely can't manage their finances or any kind of complex tasks. That's when they begin to wander and begin to forget important aspects of their own lives, including their address. Stage 6 is moderate to severe. These folks are unable to dress or bathe themselves or manage toileting without assistance. They become incontinent and they need constant supervision. This gets to be the stage when family members who are keeping their loved one at home begin to feel overwhelmed and often feel the need to transfer the patient to a long-term care facility. By stage 7, this is the advanced and terminal stage. They've lost all ability to speak. If they have maybe 3 or 4 words that they say, but they can't communicate. They're unable to recognize loved ones or long-term aides that have been caring for them for years. They can't ambulate or sit up without assistance. They cannot feed themselves. They can't smile. I think that's tragic. So in New York State, as a result of requests that I got from these patients who were newly diagnosed with dementia and their families, who wanted to know what they could do. Oh my God, what can they do to avoid dying of dementia? Oh, hang on, sorry, I have to plug in my computer. I don't know why I always forget to do that. Okay. So what was I saying? Right. So we developed this dementia directive directly as a result of the requests that I got from people asking me for help because that somebody in the family had been diagnosed with an early stage of dementia. So they were still decisionally capable. Now, of course, the first thing I said to these folks is that they could, obviously it's not the first thing I said. We did a lot of talking beforehand about options and choices and who they were and what their values were. But I told them about VSED and that they could, if they chose, while they were still decisionally capable, they could stop eating and drinking to hasten their death. It was perfectly legal. I haven't had anybody do that. They've said they were going to, but they have not been able to do that. I think that whole executive function and being able to plan and carry out a plan becomes increasingly challenging. So the other thing that I was aware of, in addition to talking to really smart people across the country who are also working on this notion of developing advanced directives to stop eating and drinking, there were a couple of really important judicial rulings, court cases out on the West Coast. One of them was in Canada, one was in Oregon, where the family members, the loved ones of a person with advanced dementia who had, while they were still decisionally capable, completed an advanced directive saying, I don't want measures if I'm ever in a place that I can't make decisions for myself or I'm become demented, I don't want to have life-prolonging measures. And in both of those cases, the judges ruled, I hear what you're saying, family members, and clearly you love your loved one, your mom or your wife, but she didn't say anything about eating and drinking. She said life-prolonging measures. We don't think providing food and fluid is a medical intervention. We think it's ordinary care. And that's what we have to provide. And she didn't say specifically that she didn't want food and fluid. So that gave everybody notice that if you want to complete a directive that says don't provide any kind of food or fluid by mouth, you better bloody well say that very specifically in your advance directive. So we wanted our directive to clearly indicate when the option to limit oral intake should be implemented, by whom, and how much to limit oral feedings. Our directive has been adapted for use by citizens in other states. I just tell them to, print it. You can get it from our website. If you go to our website, which we will have at the end, I think Jennifer's going to give some resources at the end. But if you go to my website, End of Life Choices New York, you can download this dementia directive and you just strip out the New York stuff and put in whatever state you want, but you do need to talk to a lawyer in the state in which you live who knows something about healthcare law. It's not your real estate lawyer. They're not going to be helpful here. Anyhow, so these directives are beginning to be increasingly important across the country, and other people are using them as well. But so I'm going to tell you about our directive because I think it's one of the better ones. It has two purposes. The first is to document clearly the patient's wishes about limiting assisted oral feedings when the dementia becomes advanced. The second purpose is to ensure that the appointed healthcare agent is empowered to implement those choices when the patient suffers from advanced dementia. It doesn't replace other completed directives, like a MOLST or like the Massachusetts Healthcare Proxy Form, but it augments them. It's for sure, you absolutely must have an appointed healthcare agent. You have to have somebody who has agreed ahead of time with you to take on this responsibility of collaborating with your primary care physician and implementing this choice if and when you reach the final stages, the terminal stages of dementia, which is what we discussed before in stage 7. So as I say, it includes instructions about when to begin limiting the oral intake. So this is the clinical criteria for when do you implement this dementia directive that somebody's completed, when they were still decisionally capable, right? So the healthcare agent, the appointed healthcare agent, consults with your primary care clinician, and they agree that the patient is now in an advanced stage of dementia. Could be stage 6 or 7 of the FAST scale. As I said, inability to speak comprehensively, ambulate, recognize family, be continent, or smile. So that's the first criteria. The second criteria is the patient can no longer make informed decisions. So they're no longer decisionally capable, right? And the third requirement is they can't feed themselves. So all three of those things need to be in place before this directive to limit foods and fluids is implemented. There are two options to limit oral feeding in our directive. The first option refuses all life-prolonging measures, including, of course, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. You know, that's the jumping on the chest and putting tubes into the lungs and breathing for you and all the rest of those things. It refuses all nutrition and hydration, whether it's provided medically by a peg, you know, a tube into your abdomen, into your stomach through your abdomen, or by assisted oral feeding. Plus, it specifically is written into this document that the patient who chooses option A refuses all oral feeding, even if the mouth reflexively opens when a spoon touches the corner. This was always a problem for judges who would see videos of a demented person whose mouth would open like a baby bird's when the spoon was brought to the corner of their mouth and it was sort of touched there a lot. The mouth opens, it's reflex, like babies, you know, looking around for a nipple. And judges would say, oh, look, she changed her mind. No, actually, she no longer has a mind to change. It's a reflex. It's a hard thing, though, to see somebody who might appear to be wanting to eat or drink. It's hard for families. So in addition to these two indications, you don't want to be hand-fed under any circumstances. You also request that once that is implemented, once you stop oral intake, you request that the patient receive excellent comfort care, symptom management, palliative or hospice care once the feeding is stopped. Okay, so the second option to limit assisted feeding is basically you refuse all life-prolonging measures like medically provided nutrition and hydration and CPR, but you limit oral feeding to comfort-focused feedings provided while a patient seems to enjoy or positively anticipate eating, only given foods or fluids that they seem to enjoy, and you stop when the patient no longer appears interested or they begin to cough or choke. They're not to be coerced or cajoled to eat. And again, once feeding is stopped, you provide comfort measures. Further important instructions. Once this dementia directive is signed and witnessed, you have to discuss it with your physician, your healthcare agent, your family members, the attorney, and all other stakeholders who care about this patient. It's very important. You give copies of this directive to everybody. Patients should also make a videotape of their personal values and the reasons why they've completed this directive and give copies of this little videotape to all of the above. This is an important option for informing future caregivers who may not have ever known this person as a person, and they don't understand why they're not feeding them. This is a very helpful thing for aides. So you want to be sure that everybody understands that you're not to feed this patient because you're concerned that they have an inadequate or that they have their quality of life may be okay to be fed. This is not about what somebody else thinks. This is what the patient thinks, and they've thought a lot about it before they completed this directive. And you need to review this regularly. As I said, this is early days. We haven't had a judge look at this yet. Remember that an advance directive to stop eating and drinking is not a contemporaneous voluntary choice, right? There's no V there. So it's an advance directive. It's a written directive. We expect that there are going to be challenges in long-term care facilities because of their perceived duty to feed. It's best to get buy-in by the administrators of any prospective long-term care facility before you give them all of your money. You want to know that they will honor this completed advance directive to stop eating and drinking. Most hospices will honor these directives. They just want to know that this is what the patient wants. This is what's important for them. If the patient chooses to forego all oral intake, this can be hard for family members to accept. This may be hard for them to be sure that their loved one isn't suffering from thirst or hunger. And we can talk about that in the discussion if you want. I mean, I think family members have to be considered as well here. So let me tell you a few factoids about COVID and dementia. It's interesting. People with dementia are more vulnerable to COVID. We're not really sure why. We think in part it's because of the folks with dementia are increasingly dependent upon their caregivers for those safety practices that all we decisionally capable people are aware of. Wearing masks, social distancing, washing hands. You only are as good as your healthcare providers, caregivers in reminding a person with dementia to do that, right? There are other possible reasons, lack of exercise. Usually there are other comorbidities. It's an early realization. People of color are more vulnerable to both diseases. I'm really interested. I hope we'll have time in our discussion. I'd love to hear what your COVID thoughts are, what your COVID concerns are. I will tell you something that I find interesting. Since this whole COVID horror has begun, I've gotten very few calls here in New York for people who are interested in options to hasten their death. I think that COVID has made people so terrified of dying, even though they're dying of something else, they're more afraid of dying of COVID, which is interesting to me. But I'll be interested in what you think. So I'm going to stop here, I think. That's my phone number. You can call and leave me a message anytime if you have questions or you want to talk to me about issues that you might have. Please tell me the best time for me to call you back, and maybe a little bit about why you're calling. And there's one more thing I wanted to tell you about. There's a new book about voluntarily stopping eating and drinking and advanced directives to stop eating and drinking. For those who really want detailed information that's very up to date and very well done, I say with some great deal of modesty, it is co-edited. It's a co-edited text with a philosopher, a lawyer, a palliative care physician, and a nurse. That would be me. It's published by Oxford University. It'll come out in July. It's published by Oxford University Press. It's called Voluntarily Stopping Eating and Drinking, a compassionate, widely available option for hastening death. So let me thank you right now for your attention and for your future questions. I look forward to having a discussion with you. The end.
Okay. Oops. Yeah, Judy, thank you so much. That was a lot of information and just really well presented very clearly for all of us.
Jennifer, you were going to put up some websites?
Yeah, I can do that while we wait for questions, but people can go ahead and post their questions in the Q&A. We would love to have them, but we haven't seen any yet.
No, yet.
You're gobsmacked? Everybody's did I talk too fast? That's probably what it is.
No.
Yeah. I'm going to stop sharing your screen and I will put up the resources that I have. Just a moment. Yeah. Okay, so I'll just share my screen with the resource that Judy provided me earlier.
There we go.
So the questions can only be asked in the chat or Q&A. Someone asked.
Yes, I do. Yes. Judy, do you want to talk about the conversation project? Because I know you highly recommended that as a resource.
It's something that was started in Boston, actually, by a journalist. If Ross Gelbspan is on the call, he would know more about it. I can't remember. It was a woman, Ellen Goodwin, I think, whose mother had dementia, and she realized that it was too late to find out from her mother what she wanted or what she didn't want as her life progressed. And so it started from that very sort of small, personal, good moon, yeah, thank you, to a much broader, really well-resourced presentation of information about completing advanced directives, how you decide who to choose as your healthcare agent, the kinds of questions you should think about, the kinds of issues you should consider including in your conversation. They have, I think, a small section on working with people with dementia. It's a wonderful, rich resource, and I can't recommend it highly enough.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. I'm finding that actually I'm able to allow people to talk if they have a question they want to speak. And I have one person that wants to do that. I'm a member of JP Home, so I'm happy to actually let someone on to ask their question. So just bear with me for a second. I had them right there and they've disappeared. Hang on. Or feel free, if you want to ask your question, you can raise your hand and that will alert me that you want to ask a question.
Well, Elsa has asked, how can we distinguish between depression and dementia?
They're really quite different. Depression is a mental illness, obviously having to do with hopelessness and despair. That is treatable with either talk therapy or antidepressant medication. Dementia, in the early stages, listen, it's hard to diagnose in the early stages, and you need to go to a good neurologist who has experience in assessing people for dementia. But there are very clear tests that can be done. The problem with dementia is there is no treatment, there is no cure, and it only gets worse. I mean, with depression, people fall in and out of it. I mean, it's a terrible disease when you're to live with, but it can be treated, and there are certainly periods of remission. I hope that that's somewhat helpful.
Okay, great. We have another question. Someone's interested about the after death, what happens? And she said, I'm interested in leaving my body for medical research, and I wonder what is involved in arranging for that.
I know that medical schools are very eager to have bodies, and they're a wonderful teaching tool, and they welcome that kind of generosity. You do need to make arrangements ahead of time. If I would suggest that you God knows I'm not an expert on this, but you contact the particular institution that you're interested in supporting, or Google it, right? And find out, Google, how do you make arrangements to donate your body to science? That would be my recommendation.
Okay, great. Another question is, what are the likely chances that the directives will be followed in an emergency room, even if your PCP has them on hand?
Well, if your primary care physician is in the emergency room and knows what your wishes are, you're good to go. The problem is that when people show up in an emergency room, the default is to treat, right? It's to treat unless there is somebody saying, oh, hell no, do not. And here's the documentation that says why not. The only thing I get these kinds of questions a lot, anything that's started can be stopped, right? So if somebody ends up in an emergency room and they go through the person's wallet and they find the emergency contact person, and that emergency contact person says, oh no, she doesn't want this, she doesn't want that. He said, never do this to me. I will be there in 10 minutes with the advanced directives that document it. Without that documentation, it's harder, certainly in an emergency room. And you'd have a better shot at it if you can get a hold of the primary care clinician who's been taking care of this person. They will be listened to more than a person, just, a regular person.
So along those same lines, how do you deal with a family member who knows the patient's wishes but doesn't want to follow them? Have you had that experience?
They shouldn't be their healthcare agent.
Right.
And those are conversations I have all the time. The ones that think the firstborn son, of course, should be the agent because they're the firstborn son, or they're a lawyer, or they're a whatever. It should be the person who promises to implement the choices made by the patient. And let me just say about that, it's not enough you got a bunch of kids, doesn't matter, 2 or 10. If you appoint one person as your healthcare agent, which you are required to do, you can have an alternative, but they want to have one person that they can talk to. You have to have a conversation with all the other members of the family. You have to be sure that all of the other sibs understand who the agent is, why that person was chosen, not because you love them best, but because you thought that they would have the resources or the time or the proximity to do this. But the rest of the kids have to support that person. They all have to agree that it's up to dad to decide what's acceptable and unbearable to him, period. And those are important conversations to have. Because a lot of this stuff gets packed into feelings of guilt, and I didn't do my part when she was alive, so by God, I'm going to step her up right now and be sure she doesn't die now, whether she wants to or not. So there's a lot of complicated psychodrama stuff that goes on there, and the more of that you can unpack ahead of an emergency, the better.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, Patrice, I have a few people raising their hands, so we could go to that if that's okay. I'm wondering if does Amy want to speak? Amy S, do you want to talk? You can unmute yourself if you'd like to speak.
I've clicked unmute.
Oh, there she is. Hi, Amy.
Yeah, hi there. I wanted to know, this is just nuts and bolts, if you're going to have some copies of some of this information, or if we're going to have access to the recording that we've just heard.
Yes, so both. I would say by Monday, I'll have everything emailed to people. Additionally, the recording will be posted, but at a certain time, I'm not sure exactly when that will be. But yes, I think we've had actually a lot of requests from people that wanted to attend but couldn't. And so we definitely will have that available. Thanks, Amy. And I'm going to move on to Jane Bowers. Does Jane, you want to speak?
I really appreciate this and will use it a lot. But I also want to say I'm the mother of a lively, active, middle-aged man who's paralyzed because of a spinal cord injury. And so I've had a chance to observe him and many other individuals who are devastated at first by some kind of an awful injury and some kind of, and the onset of some disability.
Yeah.
And it can take them quite a long time. Very often, if you were to ask them the day after the injury or the week after, they would say, I'm done, I don't want to live anymore.
Yeah.
But given time and support, they can come to terms and they can have full and lively lives.
Mm-hmm.
I even have a grandson born 6 years after my son's injury, and he has a wonderful life, different from what he would have had were he not paralyzed.
Sure. Jane, I totally agree with what you've said. And there are some really fine hospitals, I'm sure you have some in Boston too, that are very specialized rehab places for people who've had a traumatic injury. And as you say, in almost all of those cases, those patients are refusing treatment in their initial weeks of stay. And usually when somebody refuses treatment, it's like, okay, fine, you get to decide. Not so fast here, not under these circumstances. And there probably is a discussion about, we're going to have a trial of treatment here, and then we'll come back and talk again. We hear what you're saying, but I totally agree with you, Jane, that after any crisis is no time to make a decision.
Right.
You need time to process, you need time to be thoughtful. And certainly in the work that I do around end-of-life decision-making, the decision really must be consistent with long-held values and wishes. I mean, if all of a sudden somebody who has been very religious and believes in the sanctity of life says, I'm done here, I want you to kill me, your first question is, okay, so tell me what's going on here, because this is not consistent with what your family says is important to you. Tell me what's happening. Why are you changing your mind, or why now? What's caused this? And I totally agree with you, Jane, and it's a very good, important point, and thank you for making it.
It looks like the people who were talking about the legislation have heard that from the organizations supporting the disabled, and I'm glad.
Yes, yeah. But as somebody who's trying to pass legislation for those people who are not disabled, the challenge is to have people understand that just because you're disabled doesn't mean you're entitled to medical aid in dying. You have to be terminally ill and decisionally capable. You might also be disabled, but you have to have a terminal diagnosis and be decisionally capable. Not to belabor the point.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. I actually have Mary Polly. Would you like to talk? I see.
Mhm.
Mary Polly.
No, it's okay. I'm the one who asked about the ER.
Okay,
Oh,
you're all
Question is
set.
answered.
You're all
Thank
set. Oh, thanks so much.
Good giraffes.
Okay.
There are a lot of people in what's the more thing? Is that the chat? Is that the question thing?
There's some more questions. One asked if I could legally stop sustaining meds when I'm at a late stage of dementia.
Wait, so if you have a late stage of dementia, you can't decide about anything, right? Your healthcare agent may have a conversation with your primary care clinician about whether the benefits of continuing whatever meds, life-prolonging meds, is an appropriate decision to make given your current situation. And often those are stopped because, who cares about your calcium level? Who cares actually about your thyroid for that matter? But that's not anything that the patient can decide, because once you're in advanced dementia, you can't decide about anything. And your healthcare agent would need to have a conversation with somebody before saying, okay, I've decided you're going to stop giving those meds to my grandmother. Not so fast. Let's have a discussion about that.
Mm-hmm. And we have another question about how do you find an attorney who specializes in these issues?
Ha! I don't know. I don't know. There certainly are some. I don't know. Shall I say that again? The challenge is to find them because, it's an evolving part of the law, and it's generally, trust and estates attorneys sometimes are aware of this kind of legislation. These kinds of laws. But they're in it to create really advanced, many page documents about advanced directives, which are totally not necessary. So at least you could have a discussion, I would hope, with them. Geriatric law clinics, do those exist? I don't know. Google it. For the state, there must be some, like law schools have pro bono work that they encourage their students to engage in. But those are good questions, and it just shows you how, I sure as hell don't know everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and some people are suggesting search elder law attorney. We do have a few attorneys that we recommend from time to time. So,
Sure. Oh, Jennifer, you'll know.
Yeah. I'll try to help with that. Post the call. So let's see, I do have some more people still raising their hands, and I wondered if Ann Kelly, do you still want to make your comment or question?
Actually, no, that's fine. I'm the person who asked about finding a lawyer. So
Okay, thanks, Ann. All right, sorry, it's okay. Another person, Catherine Kirschner, do you want to go ahead? Catherine?
She asked about legally stopping meds.
Okay.
She has another
Yeah.
question, but
Did you want to speak, Catherine? You're unmuted now if you want to talk. Sounds like.
do you have Judy Guggen? Is she queued up?
Judy Goggin?
Yeah. Yeah.
Hang on.
Sorry, Judy.
It's okay.
Oh, she's here. Oh, wait a moment, please. Oh, okay. Hang on a second. Oh, just Judy Goggin wanted to talk, or did you want to do the her?
Well, she had a question. She said, who can make the determination of which stage of dementia the patient is in?
A neurologist. There are particular tests that they do, and they tend to repeat the test each time a patient with their family member or caregiver comes to see them. So it's sort of mapping their decline over a period of months or years. There are very specific deteriorations that can be measured. And there are neurologists that specialize in dementia assessments.
I have Eileen Criddle. She has a question. Of course, I will hang on a moment. I just lost her spot. Just a second. No, you know what? Please bear with me. Sorry.
Patrice, I thought you were doing this.
Well, I didn't know how to put people live. So there is, Catherine did correct her question. She said, can I legally make an advance directive when I am decisionally competent then to stop my Addison's disease meds when in advanced dementia?
Yes. While you're capable, you can write anything that you want to happen when you lose capacity. I mean, up to a point, obviously, right? You can't write a directive that I would like somebody to just, take me out when I'm at this stage. But certainly you can say that if and when you become completely incapable of making decisions due to your dementia, that you do not want the following life-prolonging measures. And then you would list them, what you do not want. And you would list what you do want. Aggressive symptom management, I would suggest. But of course, but tell your healthcare agent, tell your physician, be sure that everybody's on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
And that they put it in your medical record.
Yeah, Eileen is ready. If you want to talk, Eileen, you can go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, yep.
I just wanted to respond to the person who asked about lawyers, because you may remember that at JP at Home we had a talk by Jessica Demerly of Pabian and Russell, and I happened to use her after hearing her speak. And she's very knowledgeable about these subjects, very sympathetic, because she used to work for Ethos. So she has an understanding of, elder concerns. And she's a very good lawyer, and I was very happy with my experience. So I just wanted to pass that along to whoever asked the question.
Yeah, thanks so much, Eileen. That's great. Additionally, I have Alice Roberts. Do you want to speak? Alice Roberts.
Yes,
Thank you. Hi.
I have a
Welcome.
question about hospice care.
Mhm.
I attended a lecture years ago in which the person speaking claimed that for pain management, it was unsurpassed. But I don't know when would one be allowed to be admitted to hospice care, and how effective is their pain management.
Okay. Yeah, Alice, thanks for that. And I breezed over the hospice piece fairly quickly because I was worried that I was running out of time. Hospice requires a physician's referral, your primary care physician or your nurse practitioner or PA, who in their judgment have determined that you're now in the terminal stage of a disease. And by terminal, they mean the disease is likely to cause death within the next 6 months. So that makes you eligible. And then what happens is after the physician makes the referral, they usually recommend a particular hospice that they have experience with. They send your medical records to the hospice. The hospice contacts you and they come and they do an assessment with a nurse and a social worker. They come to your home, and hospice, generally speaking, is provided in the home, right? It's not a place you go to for the most part. I mean, I'm speaking of New York. Maybe you guys, maybe your real estate isn't as expensive and you have freestanding hospices. We don't have them around. Anyhow, so in terms of pain management, I mean, the whole goal of hospice is to meet the patient and family, that's the unit of care, where they are, and provide them with excellent symptom management and focus on quality of life issues. They will not intentionally hasten your death. That's not what they do, but they certainly will aggressively manage any symptoms that you have. Now, generally speaking, they can keep patients physically very comfortable. However, I would never say that every 100% of people can have 100% of their pain managed. Just doesn't happen. And there's certainly psychic pain and psychosocial distress, and there are lots of things that, existential distress. Why is this happening to me? Why is it taking so long? Oh my God, I can't stand this. There's no pill for that, right? And there's some kinds of pain that are particularly challenging to manage. But a good hospice team will have lots of resources. And one of those resources that you all should know about is if the usual measures to manage symptoms are not working, and the patient continues to suffer in ways that are unbearable to them or intolerable, there's something that's called palliative sedation that can be provided. Usually it requires the patient to come into an in-house setting, which can be upsetting to patients and families that want them to die at home. But again, I'm speaking from New York. Maybe it's different in Boston. You all are in Boston, right? JP's in Boston. And basically what happens is the patient is put to sleep. They're put in a sort of a comatose condition with the kind of sedating medication that you get in the OR when you're having surgery. And it's usually provided IV, which is intravenously, which is why you have to be in a hospital setting, because it's, requires special equipment. And you then are without pain, but you're also not able to communicate with your loved ones, which is, a trade-off. And you don't eat or drink because you're unconscious. And that may indirectly hasten death by dehydration. So, I tell you that to say that while it's for sure that I would never say that everybody's pain can be 100% managed or anybody's suffering can be 100% managed, there are options that exist that can really aggressively manage intolerable pain. I hope that answers your question, Alice.
Thank you. Yes.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Yeah. Patrice, do you have more questions on your end?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, I think I did have some other hands still I guess if anybody else does want to speak, please raise their hand and I'll call on you.
Here by more. What does that mean?
What did you say?
There's a number 23 here that says, is that just people? Well, I don't know. I thought it meant the number of people that were waiting to ask questions or chat.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
All right.
Let's see.
No, there are 41 people still on.
Right.
We had 59 at one point. Yeah.
Yeah, there have been some hands that have gone up and down. If anybody else wants to ask their question, please raise your hand now.
Well, I see a question here that asks whether there's any way to manage pain without making you unconscious.
Oh, yeah, that just came in. Mhm.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, there are lots of different medications that can be used, both orally and, skin patches. You probably all heard of fentanyl patches. Those are long-acting opioids that, in combination with short-acting opiates for breakthrough pain, they, generally speaking, can keep somebody physically pretty comfortable. They have to, medication has to be provided on a regular basis, not as the patient or family thinks they need it, but it has to be on a regular basis to get a blood level going. But you develop tolerance to the effects of the medication. And once you adjust to the new dose, people are not zoned out, they're not comatose, they're sleepy, but they're dying. And so they can still interact with their family members. I think that was the question.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if that's a value that's important to you, you tell that to your hospice team, and it's a matter of titrating different doses and types of medication to see what the effect is.
I think we're good.
Yeah, okay. Okay, then we're good. This was really helpful and we so appreciate all your time today, Judy. So we got a lot out of this today. So thank you so much. And thanks everybody for coming. Great program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Judy.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, and I'll be emailing you all. So thanks so much again. And thank you,
Bye-bye.
Patrice.
Thank you.
Bye.
That's great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.